Hello and welcome to another Stream Team topic discussion. This time we're going to be covering political systems in fiction. I am your host, Lord Captain Commander Dunn. Please welcome, first off, Count Valerian.
Quite so.
Worst thing in that movie.
I think it's brilliant. Only I wish that it would cross over with Max Magician, that's all.
I love you, Valerian, but you're crazy.
Well, yes.
Yeah, and let's bring in Aspiring Righty.
It would be extremely painful for you.
Did you just call me Aspiring Righty?
You could be. I don't know whether you're left-handed and trying to learn how to use your right.
I have no words for you.
Alright, let's bring on with Sia.
Sounds like a gas baby. Bring it on.
Oh yeah, that. We should watch that sometime, whatever.
Wait, what?
Osmosis Jones.
No, I know. Like, wait, what?
Sounds like a gas baby. Bring it on.
I don't understand why that.
I don't know, because it's
No
the only
question.
movie where you'll ever see Lawrence Fishburne act gangster.
Okay. Well, we're off to a wonderful start, ladies and gents. Or, I'm sorry, gents.
No, we're not.
Aspiring, you need to learn something called sarcasm. You need to learn
You're
to read
telling me
it.
that with me? Of all people?
Yes, seriously, you. Because you clearly didn't pick it up.
No.
Irony
You
is-
are not someone who should tell me I need to learn sarcasm, mate. You're so fucking short on sarcasm. I could literally, casually throw something at you, and it would be so far above you. You couldn't do it if you had a rocket that would launch you toward it.
Well, the point
You
is
know,
that-
there's a good old-fashioned phrase called brevity is the soul of wit. I think you should try applying it sometime soon.
yeah, perhaps neither of you is always brilliant at irony.
I'm definitely not. I'm fully guilty of missing on irony multiple times in my life.
It's kind of a useful skill when I'm around to grasp irony.
Anyway, shitty digs at each other aside.
Yes, quite right. Correct. And the argument already begins.
Of course we are.
And appropriately, when we're about to discuss politics.
Yeah.
Thankfully, it's the interesting kinds of politics rather than the extremely boring kinds of politics.
Yeah.
You know, there's actually a quote by a YouTuber that goes by Savage Books, I think. He basically summarized all of politics and storytelling as follows. It isn't that you don't like politics in stories, it's that you don't like bad politics in stories, or that you don't like bad political stories.
Yeah, that's pretty much the summary of the prequels in their entirety.
No. That's the summary of pretty much all of media within the past 10 years or something.
Well, Star. I was afraid we were going to get into Star Wars. There's basically no way of talking about political systems in fiction without Star Wars coming into it somewhere or other, and we've already started with that too. Oh, Codex is in chat too.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of political systems in freaking fiction. Who wants to get started on talking about Warhammer 40,000 and all of the fictional politics within that setting?
Well,
Anyone?
there's definitely some interesting stuff. I'm aware of some of the stuff in, say, the Hive cities, but I don't know a lot of these specifics. Apart from some of it is a lot of it is based around resource management and trying to keep the resources. A lot of the people at the top living in horrific opulence, while the millions of people on the lower tiers.
Hold on.
But this turns into a 40k stream. We will not talk exclusively about Warhammer 40k, don't worry.
Okay, because I have absolutely nothing whatsoever to say about that. So
That's totally fine. So I think kind of goes into general. I think that we can talk about the individual systems, the settings in which the systems take place, and then the scale of said systems. Sound about right?
Sorry about the sidebar, but unfortunately, it would appear that I am not going to. I'm going to have to back away from the stream for a bit. Some
Alright.
real life shit's going to probably keep interrupting, so I'll just come back later and see how far I could stick around.
Okay,
All
sounds good.
Laters. Bye.
have a riot.
Thanks. See ya.
Admittedly, I don't know much about Star Trek.
And with that, we have guaranteed this will not be a Warhammer 40k stream.
Thank God. I mean, oh dear.
Hmm.
Star Trek. Yeah, I mean,
I've only watched little bits of Star Trek. I've only seen maybe 3-4 episodes of the original show, and the two J.J. Abrams movies, and
We're not doing J.J. Abrams movies.
fair enough. I know that a lot of Trekkies freaking hate them, and it's Star Trek Discovery. I still
You
think.
sound like you're in a water tank.
Sorry, my sinuses are horrifically clogged. Right
It was
now.
your mic, not your voice in that case.
Oh, okay.
There we are.
Yeah. Lord of the Rings, yeah.
there's something quite amusing about Lord of the Rings in politics in the parody Lord of the Rings. They're talking about the Shire, and the chap says, in the sky as a whole, there were at least a dozen of these curious settlements linked by a system of roads, post offices, and a government that would have been considered unusually crude for a colony of cherrystone clams.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Pretty much most things you read, there is a government somewhere in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the government, in fantasies, the government system is often quite crude. The Shire is weird because it's got like practically no government, but it has a postal system. And how they even pay for the postal system, I have no idea.
And a mayor.
And the mayor, but the mayor doesn't do anything much, and it just.
And then there's the Thane of the Shire, which is another title.
It's
I know
just
that seems to
like
be concurrent with the mayor.
They're a loose community.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Thane, whatever, is kind of a figurehead. And of course, most places are just absolute monarchies. There's a bit of there's some interesting political stuff going on, sort of with when Lotho turning the Shire into a banana republic in relation to Saruman, because Lotho buys up everything. So he's basically a plutocracy. He buys up everything and takes over the country that way. And then he's propped up by Saruman because of the tobacco trade.
Yeah, pretty much. That is a good summation of the initial bits of the Scouring of the Shire. Yeah,
and that's about as political as the Lord of the Rings gets. There's
a bit more politics, I'd say, in the Silmarillion. A lot more political intrigue. some dark stuff happens, especially in the Children of Hurin.
Yeah, there's not a lot of detail about political systems, though, and there's not a lot of, and places tend to be absolute monarchies. Not always, but there are a couple of republics. There's a Lake Town's a republic, an oligarchical republic.
Mm-hmm.
I get the impression it's oligarchical anyway.
I would say that definitely the political system is in Mirkwood is a mutually beneficial system where with Thranduil at the head. I would say to a certain extent, yes. When the wrong people get in control of something, that creates a lot of problems.
It's kind of the absolute. It's kind of the fall of man, original sin, and all that rot thing, where almost anything when any humans get too much power over other humans, they're always going to tend to abuse it.
Yeah, there's a quote from Joseph Smith in regards to power. He said, if man gets some authority, it will be his first instinct to abuse it, I believe is the quote. So,
yeah, and Lewis is kind of similar to Tolkien. There's mostly absolute monarchies. There is a thing where the king is under the law, though. There's that bit where the law makes him king, but then where does the law come from? I guess from Oslin. There is one bit where the Lone Islands have a governor, and it seems like it's a kind of an oligarchical situation, because they're kind of like a slave. They make their living on slavery, and then Caspian comes on, gets rid of the governor, and replaces him with a duke. So we get rid of the republic and turn it into a monarchy. So that's the happy ending of that story.
You could theoretically have a story where the political system is fair and the tension and drama just comes elsewhere.
it could be that it's a set of people who want to destabilize the fair air government. I think an example would probably be Mistborn or an Era 2.
I'm pretty sure they mentioned a few times where the government is very corrupt and unstable. But
Fair enough.
I'm trying to think. Fuck. Like, you could just have the main character follow, like, a murderer of some sort, someone who wants to kill someone unlawfully, and the government and system is, for most purposes, fair in relation to the story. We don't have to say it's a utopian paradise of justice and all that, but it is fair enough that we aren't going to say it's a corrupt and abusive place to people in relation to the story, and we're still seeing that be an obstacle for our character.
Yeah,
in
but
this case,
oh, sorry, carry on here.
I was saying in this case, having a fair and just political system is being a gets tension and drama for our character because he wants to murder someone.
Yeah, there's always going to be a conflict. There's always going to be a conflict in any political system, unless you've got something where everybody is perfect in the story, but then you wouldn't have anyone trying to murder anybody. So
yeah,
true.
Much of a story. Much of a story.
At that point, there's the part of your concept is that you're in a utopian place, and any conflict that happens in it is the main focus and the anomaly in said utopian place.
Yeah.
So this is a good question. Do Galadriel and Elrond rule fairly? I would say yes. though admittedly the details are a little bit sketchy on exactly the leadership styles of Galadriel and Elrond. It does seem as though Galadriel learned quite a bit of good rulership when she was under the tutelage of Melian the Maya. And from what we can see in the in the Lord of the Rings and a little bit in the Silmarillion. No. The only thing we really know is how they treat their guests, and it seems as though Elrond treats them very, very well.
Lorien is a weird. Oh, sorry. Lorien's a weird situation because they have the anti-dwarf
sentiment.
They have the anti-dwarf policy where they're not allowed in, and I'm guessing it's sort of weird because I'm guessing that came from Celeborn,
Possibly.
because Galadriel doesn't seem too keen on it. But they have this rule, and then they eventually. That is one thing that does come up: relations among different races or species, between dwarves and elves, or between men and hobbits and stuff like that.
Yeah,
that's something that does have political applications that comes up in Lord of the Rings at various times, and it's generally understood that these different groups should get along together.
Mm-hmm. Describe the systems in the Wheel of Time. There's a lot.
There's some monarchies, obviously.
Mostly monarchies, yeah. Tyr has an oligarchy where
multiple lords.
Yeah, it's a bunch of lords over the same country that act as the governing body.
And then they become a monarchy.
Yeah, it's so we'll get into the various systems. One thing that every political system needs is some kind of military, intelligence, economic, staff, and government administration.
Not every political system needs a military. Some have been made specifically to have no military.
When we're back to Star Wars.
Not necessarily. I just think that there at least needs to be some kind of peacekeeping element that could be substituted for a military. Some kind of branch that maintains law and order. There needs to be some kind of method of defense against them. Yeah, the interesting ones are definitely the Aiel, because they're kind of a matriarchy that controls the set of clan chiefs by having like a duo of a wise one and a clan chief marriage usually. And the sea
folk are very rigid.
Very rigid, rank obsessed people.
Iceland actually didn't, in history, actually didn't have an enforcement, a police force of any kind. So what happened was people had to enforce it on their own. If somebody murdered someone in your family, you had to enforce whatever decrees the Parliament and court came up with, which, needless to say, you can imagine how that went. They did make settlements sometimes, but there was a lot of people killing each other going on. So
a lot of vigilante justice.
Yeah, but I mean, it would just be expected that that if you couldn't come to a settlement, that you had the right to take revenge. And so people were killing each other quite a lot. So not a good system necessarily, but they They did. It did last for over 300 years, though. So
True.
And we're going by political systems of all kinds of sizes, and one small one that we would technically have to include since we talked about the Shire a bit, are the traveling people, who are a bunch of pacifists who only real system is probably following one guy within them, mainly.
Yeah,
And
they're
beyond that, they have no system.
yeah, they're very much Romani in a lot of ways.
So that would be a system that has no economics, because I don't think they do money. They have no military, because they're literal pacifists in the worst way possible. I would call them dumb, and they don't exactly have intelligence in the way you're trying to describe. They don't have a staff, and their government administration is the simplest one possible. We follow one person.
Yeah. True.
So, while I understand why you mentioned these as things that you need to keep in mind, they are not necessarily required. True.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily. They have to manage some kind of, maybe not economic, but resource management or trade, like supply. They require ice.
How much do the traveling people trade? Because I know they just avoid interacting with anyone, and I don't think they necessarily trade amongst themselves either. They just share everything.
They still need to. They will often trade making stuff for food. It's very much a service barter system.
So yeah, the two most basic economic and government administration for those, and the rest of the three don't actually count.
Mm-hmm. Well, they do technically have a military. It's a bunch of dogs.
I believe we see that the dogs themselves are pacifists.
Oh, they are. Oh, the dogs themselves are pacifists, but the people who get close don't know that.
That's not a military.
Do the dogs even
being facetious?
Are the dogs herbivore then?
They'll eat meat.
Oh,
they'll eat meat.
Then they're not so pacifist after all. Then
they just won't hurt. They just won't hurt people.
Honestly, the traveling folks seem like the type to try forcing dogs on a vegetarian diet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
No, I'm not accepting that one.
Wait,
run does not equal military.
I'm not sure. Did we finish the last section yet? I mean, military, intelligence. What else was there on there? Go back.
Staff administration.
Economic. We sort of talked about economics. Actually, we talked about economics with the Shire of all weird things.
Mm-hmm.
Staff. Yeah. Well,
I think the interesting thing to mention with all these three, which do mainly show up in large governments, is depending on your setting is going to determine how much of or what form these take in. Because fantasy, intelligence will be fairly slow because you're having your fastest mode of transportation is horse, unless you go magic. While in the sci-fi setting,
or birds.
Technically, I did say military intelligence, even though there was a comma between them. But technically, I did say that. It's true.
So, how fast or good intelligence is depends on your setting. Same with economics. The further out you go, there's a possibility you just go Star Trek and basically make money not a thing within your own government.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. With intelligence, we do have ravens and what you call it thing. Oh, and
Ice and Fire.
Dragons.
And fire. And we have the Palantiri in thingy, Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have that. That's not exactly well. Actually, it was used for government because the kings used the Palantiri. So
yeah, that's how they would communicate long distances, especially Elendil with his sons.
Yeah. I try to in my own novel. I try to take account of how slow communications are. I tried to do a timeline of everything. So So we can get on. I think maybe we can get to systems now. We should probably mention that I think Mistborn is a bit more complex in terms of politics than some of these other works are, where it's fairly
How
crude.
so?
Yeah, Mistborn is fairly advanced. Stormlight, it's a little crude in Stormlight because you just got the High Princes, but now we're kind of getting onto different systems.
So in Stormlight, there's a few. So there's the High Princess for the Elite, but then there is, for the Thylans, there's the Merchant Council, who have a lot of power over the Queen, something Dalinar fucking hates. The Azish have an emperor, but they constantly make it clear while he has an absolute power, he does not use it. And there is a whole board of
Bureaucracy.
there's a whole board of people to tell him shit.
Yeah, there's a whole complicated system of checks and balances, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another example that Trip just reminded me of. For intelligence, Mistborn has multiple occasions where their intelligence in sending messages is seen corrupted, and even when they try to protect it using the method the magic provides, they still intercept messages and pretty much fuck up the information being sent.
And that is a good point. Sauron was mostly used the Palantiri to manipulate Denethor to show him what truth, but warp it and twist it, which is actually a very good point.
Denethor has a council, but I'm guessing it's more like a small council than like a parliament. I'm not sure because he just mentioned as all it says is Denethor was the steward was the master of his council. That's all it says. So we don't really know what the council even was.
It's definitely council with an IL, right?
With an IL?
Yeah. Rather-
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah, it's capitalized. Anyway, it's uppercase, so it's an organ of the government. But I'm not. I would suspect it's not like a parliament, but more like a closer to a cabinet, probably, or just his advisors.
Probably. There's a few things. Oligarchy, pretty straightforward. This can create a lot of fun if you have a lot of factions, since you can have agents that work together for the various factions for and against each other. You can be able to have some factions alike with each other and then other people against. That's kind of one example of oligarchy where there's no sole ruler. It's just a bunch of other people who have a specific set of
the few control the many.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the free cities, I think, are oligarchies.
Yeah, I think Pentos is one.
Yeah, Pentos, they have a prince, but then he gets sacrificed at the end of his term, which is kind of weird. Lake Town is kind of an oligarchy. There's a master, but I'm guessing he's elected by the other merchants. I don't think it's actually ever stated.
No, I don't think it is. And especially since the master just runs off with the gold and dies broken, penniless.
Yep, tragic.
Indeed, poor Stephen Fry. Anyway,
Texas.
Texas will kind of, probably, yeah, sort of. But when we don't want to go there, but yeah, maybe.
Yeah, sorry. Still in a bit of pain. So
that stinks.
Yeah, it's specifically concentrated right on my face. It's probably a really bad sinus infection. So, any thoughts on how you could utilize oligarchy in a fictional setting?
Well,
What do you mean?
Like,
You
what
want
are some neat ways?
examples or?
Yeah, like what are some neat ways that you could use it?
you can have, well, like you say, you can have different factions. Some of them can be like just around personalities or whatever, but some of them could also be, there could be more or less oligarchical factions within the oligarchy, like what you saw, like what you see in the 19th century in England, where the Reform Law of 1832 made the oligarchy slightly less oligarchical, but was still like a tiny minority of people who actually voted for things. You can do things like that.
You can have inner conflict between a small group of people.
Yeah, you can have things like where the oligarchy gets overthrown, but then it doesn't get overthrown by, and then someone can establish a dictator, or someone can be trying to become a dictator.
No 40K here, James. 9.
No, God, no, kill it,
Yeah.
kill it, dead.
Well, that is kind of a neat option where there is a religious system. I think if we're, I would definitely say that the Elenium, the Elenian systems, the Elenian countries work as individual feudal monarchs, but there is essentially a pope over everything. And
I'm pretty sure Halo's aliens follow a priest.
The Lord Ruler is kind of a theocracy. I mean, he's God. I am God. Well, he says he's God anyway.
He is effectively a god figure, and one of the branches of his government is a religious one.
Yeah, and then, I mean, even if they don't have any actual theocracy, you still can have a priesthood jockeying for power with these others. You can combine these different systems in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and even in like an absolute monarchy too, you can still have the priesthood as a force, because most actual countries are a combination. Real systems of government have a combination of these different elements.
Yeah.
They have an oligarchical element and a monarchical element, and they may also have a theocratic element, because the priesthood will also have influence.
Yeah. There's sometimes a mix between like power will be shared between like a king and a priest, and there's often some interesting stories in how kings and like whatever their version of the Pope would be, wrestling power with each other, drawing shade.
Like with Cardinal Richelieu and King Louis and the Three Musketeers.
Yeah, and there's a whole history of the conflict between the secular power and the priestly power. There's a whole world history.
I remember hearing something in a history class once of, I don't know where, but basically the king, he has to get the bishop or pope to agree to any queen he wants to marry. So normally the priest will use that to his advantage to get something from the king, often being hired on as a bishop or something, before signing off on any queen.
Yeah,
like
I don't
that
know.
Kind of shit.
I don't know if that ever actually happened, but it can still be. You can still use that in fiction.
I know that there wasn't a time where Britain kind of merged church and state, where the King of England became the head of the Church of England by virtue of him creating it.
Yeah, I mean, technically, the Church of England is still established.
Mm-hmm.
still the established church.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have lots of cases where the king is the one choosing the bishops or priests, and then you've got situations where where the king. I think this is quite common in pagan systems where the king is a priest. I mean, we don't have this division. You find that in
The Vatican.
yeah, in Numenor, the king is also carrying out priestly functions.
Yeah, and there was, and it kind of creates an interesting parallel with the Jewish system, when eventually first they had judges, then they had kings, then they split into two factions, and the king set up his own altars in Bethel.
And then they all got transported to Babylon. Well, not all of them, but
Good
bunch of them did.
percentage.
Yeah,
And a lot of them were turned into eunuchs, which
that must
is
be a riot. Yeah, that happened. That happened a lot. If you got caught by slavers, that was one of the things that might happen to you.
yeah, you would be castrated and turned into a slave. Yeah.
And sold off to work in a harem or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's a riot.
Yeah. Hierarchy of trusted advisors and staff to rule effectively. Yes, I would definitely agree with that. Most political systems, oligarchies. That's actually a lot of. Yeah, I would actually agree with that. That a lot of political systems are based around groups having power.
Here's
I think
the
the times
thing.
it doesn't is because if it's by the few, so I think bureaucracies and absolute monarchies would be two where it's not an oligarchy because it's not a.
The interesting thing with the absolute monarchy, though, if
And
it's
then
technically,
distributes that power he other people.
yeah, if it's technically an absolute monarchy, you can have situations where whoever controls the flow of information to the king may end up having more power than the actual king himself, and he's manipulating him.
Because I think an oligarchy, multiple people has to have the same or similar kind of power that another person cannot just take. Because a king, if someone were to, one of his subjects were to try to use the power he's been given against a king, the king could technically just replace him.
Oh, man. And it also depends on an absolute monarchy on the personality of the ruler.
Yeah, if they're a despot, they're generally going to be a lot of times spendthrifts and just going to do crazy things like Caligula is in Rome is kind of an example of somebody who just went absolutely freaking nuts. Needless to say, Caligula's freaking weird.
Quite a lot of the Julio-Claudians were weird.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of them are pretty friggin' weird. Yeah, definitely.
It's not that they don't have power, but it's power given by the sovereign who holds it.
Mm-hmm. As well as kind of more of a, in the case of, say, of these examples, mistress of the household, butler, royal secretary, etc., they do have their own section of power, but it's more a role / responsibility that they have.
I think if we're going by political systems, whoever has the top power that cannot be removed by someone else is kind of where it is, because in monarchy, there's one person, normally, who keeps granting people below him power, and he has the power to remove it. While in an oligarchy, presumably the top few people would have a similar amount of power and can't just have it be removed by one other. Is kind of my thing. Because yes, these people in a palace have power. I'm not saying they have none. It's just power that's been given and can very easily be taken away. Only if those being true, but only if those being ruled collectively allowed a monarch to rule. So we usually just don't use it. That is a complicated thing. So there is a very interesting video by a YouTuber called Gray CPG, who it's called The Rules for Rulers, which he shows basically one of the most important things that define any kind of ruler, whether it be a king or a politician, is how they have to balance the keys to their power. And how, for the most oppressive regimes, it's often the case of they have very few keys they need to manipulate to have their power, while in a place like democracy, there's lots and lots of keys and they have to balance lots of needs. Those needs often benefiting citizens more than taking away. It's a very interesting video that I would recommend watching, because it can show why people act like shit.
In Westeros, you have an absolute monarchy, but then you've got these ancient houses of lords who have inherited power and have economic power from their estates. And then it becomes, how does that balance out? Because, and there again, it depends on to some extent, it depends on the ruler. Like Eris was able to kill Rickard and Brandon Stark, but then of course they rebelled against him, and he wasn't able to keep the consent of the lords. But then he didn't have dragons either.
No, if he had dragons, then he probably wouldn't have had any problems. Oh, Blum's keeping his throne.
Well, unless Rhaegar also had a dragon.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, the what ifs that might have happened if Rhaegar had not died at the Trident. Because it seems like he's kind of weird and kind of a nerd.
Yes.
And slightly sociopathic. Or at the very least, heavily antisocial.
Yeah, that I kind of agree with. The Greenhands did have a point about him.
Yeah, he didn't have friends other than Arthur Dane. That's weird.
And he ran off with Lyanna, which is not the most brilliant thing either, but that's getting
into prophecy that we don't know, and a lot of mysteries that we will probably never learn the answers to.
Yeah.
Because George needs to get off his fat ass!
Not to put too fine a point in it, or else he needs to get on it. And right.
Look, he's not going to get off it. He will die on that ass, and someone else is just going to steal his chair. Hopefully.
Yeah, I would love Joe Abercrombie to finish the books, because I think he would actually put it not only a good ending, but he would also actually do a really good job, because he knows how to write a good ending. And he even kind of wrote like a lot of it, the First Law trilogy, both 1 and 2 kind of have overtures of the ending of Game of Thrones, but done really well. But yeah.
All right. So there is one thing I want to bring up, because this one's a particularly interesting one. Trip, Tommy asked a question, but would you agree that Dune has a monarchy? being ruled by first Shaddam, I believe his name is Shaddam the Fourth, and then Paul.
Spoilers.
As if you're going to read it.
True, I already knew it.
Of course, he read the wiki.
No, I just watched a review of David Lynch's Dune.
I want to first see if it's relevant to this page or not, because I will bring it up regardless. I just want to see, because I think they are individuals who have what? How or what would you like? What? Or to have monarchy or feudalism go? What do you mean by goes too far?
Maybe it could be that they transfer from a feudal system into just a straight up dictatorship by making a standing army as opposed to a feudal set of armies.
Okay. So Trip's like, kind of. That's fine. So the reason I bring it up is because I feel like you could call Shaddam at least a monarch, if not Paul with his Fremen, since they are a bit of unique case, kind of like with Rand and the Aiel. But the way that Paul and how Shaddam earlier held control of the Empire wasn't necessarily his military. It was the fact that he held something called CHOAM, which stands for, or I'm probably pronouncing this terribly, but I'm calling it CHOAM, Combine Hunnet Ober Advancer Mercantiles, which is basically the company that does all the shipping and goods of interstellar travel and pretty much owns all of it.
So it's not just a monarchy, it's a monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
Sort
Yeah,
of.
it's all
He
about the
owns,
spice.
yeah, basically, he owns most of the stocks for CHOAM, and therefore he rules. This is constantly mentioned as one of the most important keys to his power, is that he holds all the CHOAM stocks.
So Paul is more like a theocracy in a sense. Paul Atreides,
Yeah.
It's more like a theocrat.
Yeah, sounds about right.
He's kind of multiple things. He's also the god figure for his own religion.
Yeah, which is like kind of the height of theocracy.
He's kind of he's theocracy, monarch, dictator.
God King.
That is another aspect of his rule, yes, but you'll also notice people kept trying to take that away from him because they would smuggle worms away so they could make spice elsewhere. It's not his only key to CHOAM stocks, but is one of several major keys.
Yeah. So, and they have a parliament too, the Volksrad, but I think that's like the noble houses. It's just an oligarchical system. Am I remembering that correctly?
That sounds about right. Yeah, where everybody's jockeying to have control of Arrakis initially, and then it's just Paul in control of Arrakis.
It's very reassuring to know that thousands and thousands of years into the future, we're going to go back to oligarchy. Well, we're still in oligarchy, but even less democratic than we have it now. Only it'll be space oligarchy.
Yeah. Like I said, Paul basically had there were like three main keys of power, which was CHOAM stocks, spice travel, which he held with Arrakis, and he did have armies, which were very useful in his jihad. He held all three, and so he held power, which was my earlier point of every ruler has a bunch of keys they need to balance to keep hold of that power.
Mm-hmm.
If one wavers, you start getting fucked.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, see, the only other one that pops to mind offhand is the first Mistborn trilogy, where after they get rid of the theocracy, and then they have a monarchy, but they're trying to combine it with democracy and oligarchy because they're bringing in the Ska, so that's a relatively democratic element. But then the Ska don't have as I recall, they don't have the representation that would fit with their numbers. And then there are merchants. I think there's the Ska, the merchants, and the Great Lords.
Nobles.
Yeah. And those are in whatever they call the parliament. I don't remember what they call the parliament. And then there's the emperor, and there's a balance between those two.
Well, I believe Eland is a member of the nobles. He's like one of the 8.
Yeah.
So he is king, but he also is one of the 24 members in the board.
Sounds about right.
And yeah, these are all like simplifying it, but most of these systems tend to intermix with others.
Yeah, and of course, fantasy has a propensity towards absolute monarchy, and sometimes it's really. I know that Westeros is meant to be like medieval Europe, but the system is a lot simpler than it actually would have been in medieval Europe, especially and more primitive, especially the legal system. The judicial system is extremely primitive by comparison.
Break up, be more specific, something similar to what? We don't notice when you comment some of these.
Wait, I'm sorry, what's the question again?
Doesn't Brandon Sanderson do something similar in Starlight Archive?
We're asking what you're saying.
Please.
Yeah.
Isolate political systems, I would definitely agree. There's a lot of interesting things that you can do with places that are just have very little in the way of interaction with other people. I think a good example actually is there's this religious thing in it's the Kingfall Chronicles, where this young woman finds herself stuck in this very puritanical, highly religious place, and she's like, I hate this place. And it's kind of interesting to see how the small system kind of integrates itself.
I can hear Count's music in the background.
Oh, sorry, that's odd. I was down.
I was just thinking of The Crown too, so I'm just like, yep, that's fitting.
Yep, but the ironic thing being, I just turned it down.
I think it's just because we all got quiet.
Yeah.
But yeah, republic or democracy?
Well, let's see, republics. We mentioned Lake Town and.
What would the Ogier be?
Oh, that would just be like a council of elders type situation. Probably democracy, I think, would be the best.
Yeah, you don't have lots of democracies in fantasy.
Not as much, no, because admittedly, having a democracy back then is also a much more pain in the ass than it is nowadays. Because getting your entire area to vote for something at a time where you need to send it via letter is just a pain in the ass.
It would have to be to work very well. It would have to be small scale, like maybe a city state.
Like America did it while they still had to do the horses thing. But they also, at that point, I think had a lot of systems in place already. Like they had mail and shit. So it's like you can't have something start as a democracy back in the day, but you can turn something into a democracy because then you already have systems in place you can use to do so.
Yeah, I mean, there were not democracies exactly, but there were there were things like the House of Burgesses and stuff like that. There were councils and things. It's not probably more oligarchical than democratic, but there were those already in the colonies. So does a democracy become more unruly, less democratic as the population grows? It could.
Yeah, definitely start. You can only really get Athens to work as a democracy as a single city-state. When they started expanding, it kind of started to fall apart, as far as I remember.
Yeah.
Especially since Sparta kept on making life hell for them.
Yeah, even
I think so,
Athens.
yeah.
Even Athens was an oligarchy, of course. Like basically, all these places are more or less oligarchic. They've got things like slavery and stuff. But there are degrees in these things. Athens was probably about as closest to democracy as you could get at that point in time. But yeah, it definitely became less democratic. But then, of course, eventually Alexander the Great, Philip of Macedon took over anyway. Eventually, all of these city states are very unstable. You find this in Italy too. Eventually, a lot of them started out as republics. They tended to turn into first dictatorships and then become monarchical. That's one of the things that tends to happen with republics historically.
Mm-hmm. This is Sparta! We should watch 300 sometime.
The who?
300.
The Spartan movie. But yeah, democracies tend to get progressively more and more complicated and worse as it grows.
It's very difficult. It's very difficult to have an actually democratic system. We're still having trouble with it today.
And if you try and think of how something would do that interstellarly, because imagine the amount of levels of democracy you're gonna fucking need. Because already there's multiple levels where there's technically democratic elections for your mayor, your governor, and then just the levels keep going up till you reach president, and then with Interstellar, you have something above that.
Yeah, how can you even really have a democracy that's between planets, among different planets? Is it even really possible? Is there a republic in Star Wars really democracy? Yeah, it'll be messed up. I guess in Star Trek you can sort of do that because it's because it's got this utopian thing going on.
I don't even know if Star Trek does democracy or not. I don't actually know how the government works.
I assume that the Federation is supposed to be a democracy.
Possibly.
Yeah, I assume it's meant to be more or less democratic, but I have no idea how that would actually work.
I think it could technically work. It would just be hell. I don't think there's any way to do it easily, especially if you go by the limits of communication in Star Trek, because some messages take fucking weeks to send, depending on how far away you are. While in a place like Star Wars, communication is often instantaneous, or at least much faster than fucking Star Trek. It will just take a few days, so it would be a bit easier.
They're probably not trying to be realistic in Star Wars, although Star Trek is not terribly realistic either.
Not terribly, but it does. It tries.
It makes more of an effort. Whereas in Star Wars, is there even a scientific explanation for that? There's probably some pseudo-scientific explanation in Star Trek. Is there any in Star Wars? I kind of doubt it.
No, Star Wars is very much
science fantasy.
Yeah,
it's very science fantasy.
Yeah. So when you're talking about a republic, we had to bring up Star Wars again.
Yeah, Nelly Rome's a better example.
Yep, and that's another one that turned into a monarchy, dictatorship, and then a monarchy.
Yeah.
Yeah, Star Trek, when we say it's a utopia, we mean like the Federation is a utopia. Earth, at least, is meant to be is supposedly kind of like a paradise now, where they've solved poverty and all these other problems.
Star Trek more or less tries to say that. They also don't have an economy, except for trade with other people that are not the Federation.
Yeah, it's pretty vague because you can just replicate things, right?
Yeah, which admittedly, I feel like it still should technically be somewhat of a. There should probably still be a bit of an economy with that because it still requires energy. They can't just replicate anything of any size. You still need the replicators, and you need the power for the replicators.
Yeah, they need to be produced somehow. Yeah, you can't just. Or do you just replicate replicators? Once you have a replicator, can you just go on replicating replicators?
You probably could, but they don't. We never see them use replicators at beyond a certain size. Like it could technically like Star Trek is the kind of thing that's possible. They could just build a Dyson sphere or Dyson swarm more precisely and have infinite power everywhere, and that could pretty much solve the problem. But we also know they definitely haven't because they're shocked by the first one they ever see.
You have to be vague for utopia to be possible in fiction, because one person's utopia is another person's hell.
This is
Very
also
true.
true.
Because it seems like, as far as I can tell with Star Trek, the common person's means will no matter what be met. They'll have food, clothing, all that stuff, and they can try and go through any of their passions. But I don't believe they can just do anything, which I think would be some people's definition of utopia. They can't just say, please make me an enterprise. There's still like, projects, governments regulating things. There's a limit to what you can do. There's still laws in place.
Yeah, and if there weren't limits, then of course you'd find like one person would want to do this, the other person would have a different thing, and would immediately descend into anarchy, and it would just get ugly.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Like I said, not completely familiar with how they say it works. They just say it does. Admittedly, it might be a thing where it's just impossible.
Yeah. The non-humans have various other systems. Like I think Cardassians are ruled by a junta or something like that. They're ruled by the army. The Klingons have a council, the High Council, and they also have the chap in charge. I can't remember what he's called.
He has a figurehead. He's like their emperor, but I believe he's like a figurehead until they end up. I think in Next Generation they have some power go back to the emperor after they clone their demigod. Basically.
Yeah, which was kind of weird, but yeah. So they have basically it seems like it's a kind of an oligarchical system, but it's hard for me to tell because it's the High Council and whoever's in charge, whatever that chap was. Oh God, his name.
Well, Japan had something sort of similar where they had the emperor who had power and then didn't, and ever since then, the shogun who ran the military held the power until like a few centuries later, where then two states after the United States basically flipped off Japan, two of their cities decided we're going to rebel and give the power back to the emperor, and succeeded and overthrew the shogun.
Yeah, the Meiji Restoration, 1868, and then Japan became like a modern. It was still an oligarchy, though. It was a more modern oligarchy modeled after Germany, with the army having far too much power, and we saw how that ended up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either. It's been a minute.
I believe you've made it clear you haven't seen any, or at least much, of DS9. Granted, I haven't either, but you especially, considering you hate the franchise.
I never said I hated it. I just found it soporific.
You found it what?
Soporific.
You think it puts him to sleep, which is actually a good thing in this case.
Yeah.
Yeah, watch Star Trek, done.
It is an odd gap considering how much media this and media that we do around here.
He's done. There's nothing truly odd anymore about him. Everything is just odd, therefore nothing is odd.
Fair point. Fair point. Fair point. Okay. In fact, that's probably one of the less weird things about him, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is true.
Yeah. So it's the quality is very variable, but that's a whole other rabbit hole.
Indeed. Next slide. By the way, you need to learn how to do Prezi better.
How so?
Well, it just sucks.
Yeah, for
Or
instance,
Perion.
you don't have to make it so on you have like this bubble and then you have the 4 smaller bubbles. You don't have to make it go back to the bigger bubble every time you go
know.
into the next smaller bubble.
I know you don't have to, but it's I have just didn't really want to play around with the settings. I wasn't interested in doing that.
It's not that hard, mate. It just looks better. Anyways, communism.
So basically, when you say communism and fascism, what you mean is totalitarianism of various types.
Yes, that is correct.
And we're back to the last emperor, the last empire, the final empire. Is that what it's called? Anyway, we're back to Mistborn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would kind of agree that it's very much a fascist dictatorship in a lot of ways.
And we're probably also back to Star Trek, because I'm fairly sure there's a whole globe of examples in Star Trek. I know there is in Star Wars.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's I do like these definitions where communism is essentially a political or economic ideology that positions itself to in opposition to liberal ideology, liberal democracy and capitalism, advocating for a classless system. Since that's one of the major things about communism is that they try to it's very much a system that is built on trying to make a system work that really can't work is the problem, because too many people want to get powerful or to get money, and that creates a lot of problems with the system as it stands.
Sorry. Totalitarianism. Sorry, you were saying, because I had to step away. You're talking about the problems of communism specifically, right?
Yeah, and then there's also very much the same with the problems of what is it? Fascism has very similar problems where it's trying to have a very specific set of values that ultimately are not really feasible.
Oh no, kill it dead. Please no. Please no. That can't be. The universe cannot be so badly constructed as that, surely. And why are you insulting us all? aspiring thing.
This is a quote, okay? This is
You're
the
insulting
quote that will
yourself,
end the
too.
world.
You're insulting yourself too, you know.
Look, I am the you in that. I am not the we.
Soft kitty, warm kitty.
Little ball of fur.
So
We need to sing Dundat so he can fall asleep. He is
Yeah.
Sheldon after all.
yeah, absolute monarchy can kind of be totalitarian system too. Like ancient Rome, the empire wasn't light years from being totalitarian.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. It got pretty nuts on occasion in Rome.
Yeah, and they had this whole thing. It reminded me of Stalin, where the senators would like have to say like 27 times, "You have restored our constitution to its former greatness," or whatever. And there's a whole list of things that they had to say, and the number of times they had to say it. And
Yeah,
it was
true.
like, it was like, what is this? Are we in Stalinville here? In fact, I think I ended up stealing that for my own novel and having people say all sorts of rot like that several times to the Sunderian emperor. If I weren't eating, I would dig up my book and find what rot these people had to say to the emperor, but it doesn't really matter. The principle still applies. It was kind of an ideology.
And
Anyways,
then,
let's move on.
mhm.
I think we've talked as much as we need to about communism and fascism.
Mhm.
Well, except how do people use it in novels? And the obvious example is the obvious examples being, someone already mentioned them, 1984 and Animal Farm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Codex was right when bringing it up. They would send Pips to the glue factory.
Yeah.
So, anyways, setting.
Yeah, since you basically have three types of settings that you can do. You can do past, present, or future.
Indeed. We know about the past. This is basically, I think most of it can be considered the tech tree to an extent. Past
Mhm.
being Stone Age tech, present being modern day tech, and future being shit we haven't made yet.
Yeah.
And all of these basically will tell us how these different governments work, since how fast or effective things are is very important based on technology.
Yeah, I mean, it's affected by communication, so yeah.
So, question: if we were to do a apocalyptic future where mostly all the technology is dead except for guns, would that be considered present or future?
I would definitely say that would be considered future in a sense. Sorry, what?
Are you looking at what?
Looking at what? Sorry.
No, what were you looking at?
Nothing in particular. I'm sorry. I'm a little bit delirious.
I can tell, mate.
Yeah, that's not fun. So
All
I would
right,
definitely
you go.
I would definitely say that if we go post-apocalyptic, that's usually future.
Future could be predicted as.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oops, sorry about that.
Planned or wished for, sometimes predicted as in Foundation, because future then becomes present. That's actually a very good point.
And the future is usually going to be developing certain things that are in the present. In fact, people writing about the future are often doing so as a way of commenting on the present, right? So, so you can find a certain something that's going on in the present, and then you imagine how it would develop. You can develop it to its logical conclusions, see, or illogical conclusions, see it developed out in the future. This is actually quite common. And then that also, of course, affects how the systems of government work, because you're developing certain social situations in the present and saying what would happen if that were developed to an extreme.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think a better way to say it would be kind of tech tree to an extent.
True.
Because past, present, future is... You can easily start muddling that.
Especially if you have a time travel.
And Wheel of Time is especially a weird one, since it is technically both past and future, and the way we're trying to kind of say this.
Is it because it's like a wheel?
Because it is technically post a very advanced modern society that proceeded to go through its own apocalypse, and there's still little bits of technology left over. But it has basically been tucked back into the Stone Age.
You've probably heard that Preston Jacobs had a whole theory about the Song of Ice and Fire being post-apocalyptic.
What was his best piece of evidence?
Well, he mentioned various weird forms of technology, like Storm's End being built in a way that nobody could build it today, and things like that. Various materials that exist in some ancient, like this weird like black oily stone thing or something, which might be, I don't know, rubber or concrete or something. I don't know. It wouldn't be concrete. What I'm talking about.
It's very much a like there's a lot of evidence, or at least a lot of people will say, like, it kind of like Storm's End kind of seems like it's a nuclear reactor, and that a lot of the magical elements are just sci-fi that's left over from a post-apocalypse.
Preston used to have this big thing about it's actually sci-fi. But what was I going to say about? Oh yeah, the Sword of Shannara. Also, it's post-apocalyptic. They come to this ruined, modernistic or futuristic city, and it has robots roaming around in it. In a sense, you could even say that Lord of the Rings is post-apocalyptic. Maybe. I know that Fire just said no, it's not post-apocalyptic, so I didn't want to get into it at that point in time. I just wasn't in the mood for that. But there are things like Polynteria and stuff like that, which there are things that seemed like they were more advanced. It seems that technology might be more advanced in earlier periods under Numenor than it is at the time of the War of the Ring.
Definitely. There's I think at one point Tolkien had a whole thing where he was considering doing a steampunk Numenor, I think it was.
Yeah, there was a video on it in Deep Geek, I think.
Yeah, I love Robert from Indie Geek. He is super cool.
Yeah.
Just a genuinely just good, sweet guy.
I don't know him very well, but he seems very pleasant, and he has a nice accent. So is Lord of the Rings post or pre-apocalyptic? Probably both.
There was definitely an apocalypse with Numenor.
Yeah, and then there was one before that with Belerion. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Beleriand is interesting that eventually the Valar just said we can't ignore this anymore, and created all, and just because there were just too many issues with Morgoth.
Yeah, I think they may have got a bit carried away drowning Beleriand in water in the sea, but hey.
Oh, that's unfortunately what you do. Oh, when gods fight.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Indeed. We often do it ourselves, Beleriand, don't we?
Oh, I have at least 2015 times.
Indeed.
So
Yeah, a lot of the political systems in the past focus on very clear stuff with, say, fantasy, the typical fantasy stuff where you're where it's a lot of resources and resource management, military stuff. The present gets a little bit more complicated where you're using a modern political system, because you have a lot to choose from. You could use the stuff like the American government. You can use stuff like the Parliament in Britain.
I
There's a
think
whole
to say
bunch.
present is less complicated than the past. Yeah, I say past ones normally don't get into it, but just go into the British royal family in the past 3 centuries and you will find it's more complicated than most things. Because they did not have a proper line of succession. And
yeah,
if you don't have that, you're fucked.
that's certainly an area where it can get complicated. In that's an area in the past where you can get things complicated, and we do find that in Song of Ice and Fire, at least.
Yeah.
It's
Because normally when we do the past monarchy thing, we're just like, yeah, we clearly know who's going to be the heir, firstborn son. Except that was, 1, not always the case in the British royal family, and 2, the day they made it the case, they immediately got fucked because immediately the heir died.
and 3
at the worst possible time.
And 3, that's not the only system of succession that exists there are lots of different systems that exist in various monarchies. So there are systems where it's not necessarily clear who the heir is going to be.
Yeah, and again, bigger army diplomacy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of Cold War stuff that goes on.
I wasn't talking Cold War. I'm just saying person with bigger army gets crowded and says fuck you to the other guy.
Yeah, that's often the case.
Yeah, it's not uncommon for the person with weaker claim. Sometimes you find the person with a weaker claim actually gets the throne.
Because they hold the army.
And Henry Tudor being the example that helps to mind of that.
Yeah, since you have the whole thing where he beat Richard III at Bosworth Field.
Yeah, he didn't have a very strong claim at all, actually.
No, didn't he marry a girl with a good claim?
Oh, yes, he did. He married Elizabeth of York, and she had a much stronger claim than he did. So it's all good because they're all descended from her anyway. So it's all good.
Which is why he married her.
Yes. Smart
If you
shot.
don't have a claim, just kidnap someone who does.
I
Hey,
don't know if he. Well, I don't think he kidnapped her.
we or at least I don't know how willing or otherwise she was, but it worked out for him and sort of for his heirs. And then, of course, with Henry VIII, it just became a complete utter mess. After
Yeah.
him.
Yeah, it was
And
a
it
pretty
gets-
bad mess.
Oh, and it gets complicated with other factors too, because they wanted to have a Catholic. They didn't want to have a Catholic on the throne. They wanted a Protestant on the throne. So this is another thing you can bring in. You can bring in things that don't even have to do with the actual claim itself at all.
Yeah,
As
like
reasons for preferring this or that candidate.
yeah, like is this we don't like his religion, therefore he is not going to be able to be king.
Yep. So sorry, Chuck Bites. How unique. Let's see. Oh, a unique political system that has not been shown before.
It would be very difficult. You would have to do a lot of study into political theory, and a bunch of other things.
Yeah, I'm not sure you could do it unless you have a life form that's completely different to human beings.
If we're going by the condition, it has to seem like it could exist. Then very tough. Because presumably most systems will fall apart. If
They're
not
only,
done right.
yeah, there are only so many certain. I mean, there's a lot of variety in human political systems already to get one that has never existed before, given the limited. I mean, it has to entail some. There has to be some. There are only so many ways you can divide up power, and you can apportion power, I should say. And I think most of them have been done already in the real world.
Yeah, humanity's pretty much done a lot. Has done a lot of stuff.
A lot of trial and error.
Oh,
And it
Yeah.
is at that point, okay, so we give power, we have everyone get equal power. We have power held by few. We have power held by one. We have power given by the many to a few. We have just anarchy.
Yeah, we've got like there was a book recently about stateless societies and how they work, but I haven't read it. I suppose you could try that if you wanted to get away from political systems altogether and do something weird. Now, I personally don't think anarchy is very workable. I suspect that even in those systems where it seems like there's no direct system of who owns power, there has to actually be some way.
So that is a tough as fuck question, but I would have to say the systems where the most people are needed to elect whoever has the power. Because then because if those people's needs aren't met, those people can't get elected. So democracy would be one of them, but also some others. Because basically, whichever system requires most people living a better life to function better, or at least support the people who want the power, it will equal a better quality of life.
So we're talking about the closest thing to that will probably be somewhere in Western Europe.
Benevolent despot? Or what I was saying.
No, I wasn't thinking of. Benevolent despot most effective? I don't know. A despot has to rule. Even a despot has to rule through people. So a lot would depend on who he's ruling through and to what extent his bureaucracy is complying with his orders or not.
The problem is any benevolent despot still has to have his three main, his very few keys. So you need all of them to be benevolent. So it's very hard to basically have a dictatorship by someone who's a good person and will then stay a good person.
Good luck with that. It does happen, but
very rarely. A lot of things have to line up.
It's not gonna last it's not gonna last very long after the benevolent ruler either, because who's going to take over? Do you think it's going to be another benevolent despot? Highly unlikely.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, I mean, unless he's also immortal, that would be nice. Wouldn't it get boring after a while, though?
Probably.
Yes, I'm sure you'd make a wonderful benevolent despot trip, but then you need your keys to be also great benevolent despots, and none of them you'd have to have none of them be vulnerable to bribes. Because if even one of them is, then there is a place where someone else can move in, take power, and fuck you up. That is a big issue.
Yeah, and he would have to not get corrupted. Like, he would have to stay benevolent. He would have to have either benevolent people to work through, who would also have to be not corrupted, and or else he'd have to have absolute control over them, mind control them. In which case, is he benevolent if he's mind controlling these people to make them put through his benevolent decrees, or is he now just a tyrant, not a despot anymore?
Yeah, because here's the thing. Basically, imagine whatever place you want to be the despot of has a set amount of money that you can have earned and be given to you via taxes or whatever. So say $1 million, just as a little set number. If you get any of that money to the people and not your keys to power, that is money someone else can promise to those keys of power if they were to side with him over you. So you basically cannot give any money to the people without risking someone else trying to corrupt one of your keys against you.
Yeah. Whereas if you keep all the money to yourself, then you're not being benevolent anymore either. So there's a bit of a conundrum. So, yeah.
Yeah, Trip would very much go. I would never have someone drawn quartered because they poked at me before coffee.
What did she say?
I would never have.
I would never have someone drawn quartered because they poked at me before coffee. Well, that's good to know. That's very reassuring. Thank you.
Indeed. This hilarious. I would say a lot of it relates to a lot of the present stuff is more large scale planetary stuff, at least from what I've seen in stuff like the House of Cards or Designated Survivor, where there's a lot of balancing acts that need to go on between multiple different countries.
Well, you're thinking of only wide-scale stuff. Present day can also be Better Call Saul.
That too, yeah. Where
that only focuses on American laws, mostly, unless it slightly goes into Mexico. but mostly American laws, mostly just specific things for very small scale stuff like banks, how you get things through the system and confirmed, little loopholes in laws and stuff like that. It's not world spread, it's small scale, not even the biggest stuff being just across states.
So, is Mistborn Wax and Wane present? It seems like it's early. It seems like it's equivalent to the early 20th century. Would you call that present?
I'd call it a bit more past, because we would count anything in the 1900s past.
Yeah. However, it's the relatively recent past. It's not like monarchies and feudalism and all that.
Well, that's just because their government system has moved past that.
Yeah.
They're still at a place where kings could exist if they wanted them to, but they don't because they were under a lord ruler for so long that they hate the concept.
Understandable.
It's basically how like America hates kings and royalty completely and has like specific laws as a fuck you to British royalty.
Yeah, even though the president is effectively a monarch.
Effectively, but you will never have them admit so, and they will go through as many great pains to make sure that is not seen as the case.
Yeah.
The president has a shit ton of checks on him. Like a shit ton. Congress is a pain in the president's ass, and vice versa.
Yeah. I mean, I know that there's a system of checks and balances. I also know there's a strong tendency for presidents to try to avoid being checked if possible. And a lot also depends on which party is not to get too political, but if the party of the president owns
is in the minority,
is in charge of Congress, well, dominates, I should say, Congress too, then there are a lot fewer checks, and we've seen that in recent history. But
yeah, I would concur with that. That's I don't think that's too political to say. I think that's just describing the objective problems that can exist in certain systems where you fall into cronyism.
Yeah, there's effectively two parties that can have power in the government, and depending on which one holds a majority somewhere, defines how many shenanigans can happen.
Yeah.
Because a lot of, like, for instance, Congress can technically, there is a thing where Congress might be able to just remove the president anytime they want. Because there is a very unclear law about it. So, the president could just easily be removed by Congress.
Possibly.
I say easily. I say easily. There is also the Supreme Court who can also say no.
Yeah.
Hindsight has not what the law means. Go fuck yourself.
And that's a whole other can of worms. Because the Supreme Court, there are even fewer checks on the Supreme Court in practice.
The Supreme Court is effectively above everything. They don't have the power to make shit. Like, they can't make laws or anything, but they do basically have the final say on what everything means.
Yeah.
Including on the president and Congress.
Yeah.
So while they can't make anything, they effectively say what the rules mean.
Yeah, it's a system that has its problems, especially since we decided for whatever reason only to have 9, even though the Constitution says you can have. I think the Constitution says you can have as many Supreme Court justices as you want. So why we only have 9, I don't know.
It's to specifically get people to not constantly trying to rig the board. Because there is a whole thing on putting more justices, but that is specifically so they can get more of their members on it. It doesn't actually make it any more or less advantageous to have more justices.
Yeah, maybe it should be. Yeah, I mean, we could talk all day about what the best solution is, but it is a problem, certainly.
It's a very strange one because some people want term limits, and that's a very risky thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do a lot of
Politics.
you can do a lot of fun stuff with kind of present politics where you're having each individual faction of government having to
Hate each other.
hate each other, work together, make deals with each other, figure out different kinds of
Act completely bullshit and basically against your own interest and be some of the worst human beings on earth.
yeah, true.
Oh,
Yeah,
Like, genuinely, if you just want inspiration on shitty politics, just look up any modern day politics and you will eventually find some of the stupidest things that people do.
yeah. Yeah, true.
yep. I mean, you can look any period of history. You can find something. Then you can combine all the worst of them together, and you can have a riot.
Hmm.
And in the future, where everything gets, you can make anything infinitely more complicated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much.
And then you can also oversimplify things in insane degrees too.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Pardon any noise that you hear. Carry on.
Yeah, like for example, you have you can do, I think one example is actually the Expanse, where you have Mars acting as its own government separate from Earth. And there's often factual divides between Mars and Earth. You could go with simple stuff like individual planets having their own stuff. You like with Star Wars actually often will do this, where each individual planet will have their own system of government slash stuff relating to the individual working mechanics of it.
Well, something to kind of say. There's like, in America, there is national laws and state laws, and there's each layer down gets specific laws. Basically, the same thing can happen with planets, where each planet decides to have their own planetary laws, which can be fucked.
This is the weird thing about the future. For some reason, it seems that in the future, all planets are united on every planet seems to be in, or almost every planet seems like it's united under a single government. But what if it were actually more like the situation, the present, and the planets had several different governments, but they had the interplanetary communications and stuff like that?
Well, presumably that would be what happens if you don't have fast enough travel, because at that point, it's similar to why America decided to say fuck you to the British. They were very far away and kept making laws despite being very far away.
Yeah,
Like that.
but I mean,
What happened with
within each, but it is odd that these planets all managed to, that every planet in the future managed to have a single world government. Almost every planet in the future seems to have a single world government. I guess it's just simple. I guess they do it for story simplification purposes, for the purposes of plot. It just simplifies things.
I think there is a bit of something where you could say that they would want a unified face for a planet when you're dealing with two different planets, regardless of what might be multitude of factions on a planet. And also, if you're going on Mars, you might not have time to create factions yet. So at this point, you are just Mars.
Yeah. What was I going to say about? I had a thought, but I've lost it. Maybe it'll come back in a moment.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts about the future? A lot of the future relies on
What kind?
space travel, usually. 40K is an example of this. Same with Dune.
There we go.
where 40k has the warp and
No.
Dune has spice.
Do indeed has them spice. And we all know my spice tolerance.
Very nice, very spice.
It's very spicy. So yeah. Oh, that's another example where they're all, where they're these, where 10,000 years in the future they have these interplanetary governments.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. The other depressing thing about the future, according to Star Trek anyway, is that you've still got geopolitics, only it's space geopolitics.
How do you mean exactly?
Well, you know, there's the Cardassian Empire, there's a Federation, there's the Klingon Empire, Romulan Empire, and they all have these conflicts over who has which space belongs to which empire, and it becomes an issue. You're entering Cardassian space, blah blah. If you're Federation, you're entering Cardassian space. That becomes like this kind of issue.
Yep.
So it's like modern day Earth, only
Space.
spread throughout the entire galaxy. So that's kind of
there is a literal neutral zone in Star Trek. So yes.
yeah. There's a neutral zone. Yes. So yeah. So it's not very reassuring to know that we're going to go through the same geopolitical rot again in 400 years from now.
Don't worry, we're already near to the point where they thought we'd be on having soldiers high on drugs.
We probably do.
Yeah. Whether it's licensed medication or other things entirely. Any other thoughts on the future before we... I think that's pretty much it, other than kind of scaling things. Since like we have gone over like you can go from village to city
Nomads.
to kingdom, nomad. Yeah, that's a good example. That's a good point.
Star Wars has the same, pretty much the same thing happened in Rome back in BC is going to happen in Star Wars in whatever year it's going to be. Actually, that's long ago. So I guess it's a long time ago. So maybe it's even older than Rome. But anyway,
a long time ago, in a galaxy far away.
What the fuck are you saying?
Kill it.
Weird Al Yankovic.
I have not heard that one of his.
It's a parody of American Pie, only it's Star Wars.
No. I like American Pie. Don't ruin that.
Bye, Miss American Pie. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Take the Chevy to the levee, but the levee
was dry.
Good old boys drinking whiskey and rye.
A democratic military. That's an interesting thought. How would we go about making that?
Hell. Because
like
does everyone's rank amount the same in a vote?
There was an Oz book where it wasn't the same thing, but there were like 6 officers and 1 private.
Wasn't there? Was that a General Ginger, or am I thinking of another? Or is that another of the Oz books? I've only read 4 of the Oz books.
Yeah, you might not have read this one. This was Queen Anne so forth. She wants to conquer the world, so she collects like a general, a major, a colonel, I guess a lieutenant, and 1 private, and all these guys all the officers are all they do is give orders. Forward march, and then the private has to go and march. Needless to say, she didn't conquer the world. Spoiler. Sorry.
Yeah, the Osbooks really can't be spoiled, I think, for a democratic military.
No. There's
No.
no voting. They're just a unified, like
Collective.
they're just an autonomous body. There is no ranking. There is nothing. They just perform a duty. Whoever is decided to be the most capable of performing the duty.
Yeah, I think for democracy, you have to have individuals for democracy. I don't think a collective mind counts. Although that is something we've not discussed, because that would involve a completely different approach to government. The Borg doesn't really fit into any of these categories that we've mentioned so far. Exactly.
A collective mind wouldn't really be like a government system. It would just be it's like having one person cannot be a government.
This is
Basically.
true. And a lot of it just depends on whether or not what kind of scaling you want. And each differing kind of scale will have its own political types of intricacies involved in it. Like if it's a small town, a lot of it's going to be the interpersonal politics from people that have probably known each other for a while. And
Like in Emmonsfield.
And either really like each other or really hate each other. Like everybody hates the Congers and Coplands.
I don't think
It is an interesting thing to think about.
If you have a hive mind with free will, is that even possible?
Ooh.
I think it would. I think to define what she's saying by hive mind with free will, it's everyone knows everyone else's thoughts, but there's still individuality. Which, can you have a high mind with people still having individual will? I am not sure. That would
seems
be
like
a thing to think about.
Yeah. You could get all sorts of nasty stuff going on with people having mind control wars with each other.
also procreation would be interesting.
I don't think I want to think about that.
Unless you build everything, unless it's a kind of a queen situation like the Formix in kind of sounds like kind of sounds like something out of Three Body Problem, actually. I've never read it. I just heard I just listened to Dragon
No.
Telepathy, not telekinesis.
She said telekinesis. I just needed to reiterate.
Of course. Yeah. You're right. You're right. Telekinesis is moving. That's correct. It's not that pedantic. They are quite different things. But then I'm a pedant. But then I'm a pedant. So hey, that's why I don't think that's that pedantic.
Well, it's the literal definition of words.
Yeah, fair enough.
I just expected to be called pedantic for that correction.
Yeah,
but yeah,
I mean, we are a writers' club, so we do need to be concerned about words. That's kind of what writing involves. So yes.
Mm-hmm.
How governments work with species of different kinds of.
Yeah, there are good. If you have multiple
Dogs and
different
stuff.
species, then
Oh, right. One, you say it mostly for the former, not the latter. And two, right, I keep forgetting. Having different species try and make any kind of unified thing is gonna be hell, because just imagine something that doesn't have the biology of a human. How the fuck do you make facilities to provide for both types of physiologies? For instance, say there's a species that cannot, gets blinded by the light that humans see normally in. How are you supposed to solve for that?
What if there were sentient lichens, and lichens being a combination of what is it? There's a fungus and there's something else.
Moss?
Something. And they're like in a state of symbiosis. Maybe it's an alga of some kind. And how would that system of government work?
Telepathy might solve for different species and physiologies.
Or it might be a way of making the one species could dominate another species.
Or another option is if like the bodily functions of one particular group is toxic to humans in terms of just even exposure to those things will make humans sick.
There actually are.
That's why I kind of provided the light example. Like one is too bright for one species to see, while the other, while having it dark enough, would be to blind humans because they don't have enough light to see. It's like how would you make it so you have a facility that can be able to provide for both without hurting one or the other? And that's just like one very simple change.
There actually are at least a couple of novels with non-human species forms of government involved, but they're fairly primitive, of course. There's Watership Down is one of them. The other one I think was called Dunstan Wood, which has totalitarian mole societies in it. It also has mole sex scenes.
What?
Oh, and the moles have writing too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Strange in a Strange Land. I've heard that phrase, but I've never read that book.
I've heard of it, didn't realize it was about Martians.
Watership Down has a totalitarian. The most interesting is the kind of totalitarian rabbit society. There's also the freer society that the Hazel and whatnot have. Watership Down people have, and then there's the bizarre thing that they have. The one with the wires, that one. The artsy rabbits.
Or the rabbits that are just waiting to die.
Yeah, that one. That's a really interesting one. Although I don't remember anything about their government, but this whole society and culture thing, really interesting. So if you haven't read that book, worth a read. But anyway, they have this thing called the Ausla, which is like the council that advises the chief rabbit, and they also have a secret police. In the totalitarian rabbits also have a secret police, and they have a system of IDs too. Yeah, I think that's an oversimplification to say it's simply humans represented as animals. That's a bit of an oversimplification, because there are lots of references to specifically Lapine,
Organization.
Organization, and in terms of their way of life and all that. But basically, you can't really do a novel that isn't where you're not, in a sense, having humans represented as animals, because we can't get into the rabbit's mind that easily.
Agreed.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Let's go with good thing.
Yeah, probably. That's still how we think rabbits would think. You can't really do it otherwise. There's really no other way of doing it.
Yeah, since I imagine that rabbits don't really have complex character thinking. Kaiju, that's actually an interesting idea where you could basically make a system. Actually, in Pacific Rim is actually a neat example where they have the political structure just kind of falls apart, is rapidly falling apart. because they don't, because they're trying all these things, and all the world governments have come together because of the kaiju, but then that creates problems because the they eventually start thinking, oh, this is a bit of a, then they just kind of commit to an action and then don't realize, oh, this is a bad idea. And kind of how kaiju affect world building is interesting, because you could have kaiju as beasts of burden, you could have kaiju as what is it?
The things that wipe out humanity.
Yeah, something that needs to you need to work within the constraints with.
Also, probably fucks up the square cube law.
Square cube law. How does that relate exactly?
Kaiju technically cannot exist. They'd be too big. They'd crush themselves.
True. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Past, present, future tense. Yeah, that's true. Any other thoughts on political systems that we haven't covered? I think we've been fairly thorough.
Sorry.
Any other thoughts before we conclude? Since I think that we've discussed this topic pretty thoroughly, is there anything that you guys wanted to bring up really quick?
Do we want to talk briefly about how we do political systems in our own writing?
Sure.
Probably just briefly though, because I'm gonna have to go on my walk, and you need to get some sleep.
Yeah, I am feeling a lot better though, for whatever reason.
You do sound a lot better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure why, but it's the pain in my face is almost completely gone, which is nice.
Yeah.
Yay. I have ginger still.
I don't know if I have any, but
Just
I'll,
look.
You could.
Why
Or
does
I-
your family not have ginger?
Or ask your mother to get some for you.
it's Sunday.
Oh, you can't do that. You'd have to pay $10 just for her to get in the car.
Is that how their family works?
No.
Do you pay rent to your parents?
Yes, because they want me to be at least somewhat adult.
You can still be an adult without having to pay rent to your parents. My sister is 25 and didn't have to pay rent. Just saying.
And I know my parents think differently than yours do.
How dare they? I bet they charge you for meals too.
No, I buy my own food.
See?
See?
Well, they don't make food except on Sundays. It's pretty much just my problem.
They also pay him. If he wants to talk to them, he has to pay them. I'm not going to talk to you anymore today, son. You didn't pay your talking to us conversation fee yet.
Yeah.
Seriously. Just your parent. If your parents want you to move out, making you pay to stay at your place is only going to slow you down more.
Yeah.
Well, it's pretty cheap. It's only like $300 a month.
Still, that is 36,000 a year. I think. I might have done that wrong.
Um,
There's
I
a-
think,
No, it's
no,
36.
no, 3,600. Never mind. Added an extra zero.
36,000. Like, I do not make that much.
that would be a riot. I think his parents should charge him that.
Maybe that'll make you leave faster.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So anyway,
In terms of political systems, mostly I just use a lot of the systems I use is a fairly standard medieval monarchy for the most part. There are times where I'll have like a great council or stuff like that in the Dragonlord Annals, but for the most part, it's fairly standard stuff like that. With admittedly with my I guess you could call it space Mormons, where
Don't send them to Dramaturgia.
carry on. Sorry.
no, it is funny, yeah. Where
Space Mormons.
where it's basically Warhammer 40K with Mormons.
They have their spacesuits all have ties and jackets.
Starship Troopers shows what happens when Mormons go into space. Done.
Seriously, you should call it the Space Mormon Trilogy. Yeah, where it's the political structure is more just is definitely a theocracy, and it's very individualized, as one guy has a fairly secure military power over a specific area or a specific set of planets.
And of course, they're Mormon.
Yeah.
And he has a harem too. Of different space females. It's somewhere between a harem and a menagerie.
No.
Sorry. So yeah,
Gird your loins.
what did she say? Mormons in space coming to you soon. Gird your no comment.
Gird your loins. That's not sexual.
Oh, not in the least. Especially not when we're talking about space harems.
Mhm.
But yeah, Thunderon is also an absolute monarchy. It used to be a more primitive form of monarchy, and they used to have this ritual of where they would play a ball game, and supposedly the person who would win the ball game would be emperor. But I don't think it ever actually worked like that. I think that must have been just a ritual, and now it's definitely just a ritual because the emperor always has to win. But they do still have. Sometimes the imperial family might meet and decide who the emperor is. Like a few of the immediate relatives of the previous emperor might meet and decide who the current emperor is going to be. But yeah, it's sort of mixed with sort of feudalism, but sort of not quite feudalism. There used to also be an assembly. That was long ago. They don't have any kind of assembly now. They have like 9 color-coded ministries now, which is like the closest you get to the cabinet. And then under those, you've got a bunch of other sub-ministries. Terrania has an assembly still. The country that their civilization was based on. They would still have an assembly in addition to a monarchy, and there's a priesthood, which also has enormous influence. It's not exactly it's not a theocracy though, but they still have enormous influence. So I may eventually write a more recent novel where it'll be more like modern day constitutional monarchy thing. But we'll have to see it. We'll have to finish this one first.
We do not have nano. I don't have nanobats. It's not that advanced.
So it's not magic?
What are you talking about now? Oh,
Magic underwear.
magic space underwear.
It's a reference to the fact that more LDS people have garments, which a lot of people will call magic underwear.
Yeah, the less said about that, the better.
The fact is, you call it magic, and it is underwear.
It's not necessarily magic. It's just sacred. There's a difference.
It has miraculous powers. That's why
And you
they
believe it protects you, does it not?
It can act as a protection. Yeah, there are times where people have claimed that it has helped them under certain circumstances.
It helps with the harem.
Indeed.
So are we done describing our political systems? Or is aspiring writer want to have a go?
Oh. The one I'm currently working on is basically a dictatorship oligarchy in my setting. There are 5 what people consider gods who have basically taken over control of a good swath of the galaxy. Since they can literally just pummel every other person into submission via mind control or whatever.
Oh, I want to be one of those gods.
Yes, you would be, but yeah. They hold absolute power, though they're slowly weaning off using it. And they have a council of systems and sort built up, so that way they can have the place be governed without them there, which is their end goal. And how that system works is basically a very, very fucking down council system is basically representatives of systems. Then there's representatives of planets for those officials. Then it just keeps going down to like a city or district level. Who all have their own little rules and regulations and shit like that.
So there are globes of different levels. And there would have to be in an interplanetary system. There would have to be globes of different levels.
The rest of them aren't gods. They're just some are elected, some aren't. Some representatives are literally just represents of systems that are basically useless except for mining.
Fair point.
It's meant to kind of simulate how fucked up actual government can be by it being really, really complicated.
Yep, that's what would really happen if you... In fact, if you had a space government, it would be even more messed up than the current governments are, probably.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is why it's not a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be pretty difficult to run any kind of a space thing.
Yeah. The other settings don't get quite as creative. The fantasy one I have planned is basically just kings and governors.
Yeah, and that kind of goes with fantasy, unless you're doing like Mistborn. But then with Mistborn, you're kind of bordering on science fiction. Oh,
Yeah.
dear.
That's true.
Oh dear, I guess we didn't.
I think
it's getting so late. Too.
I think it's just because some of us don't think about it as much, because I'm in a futuristic setting, so I don't really have there isn't really a prejudice in the setting to go against that, and I also didn't include one in the fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can think of is in the priesthood in my thing, there are priests and priestesses, and theoretically that goes all the way up. So, but then of course in practice, the male priests tend to dominate, and the female priestesses tend to be a little subordinate in practice.
I mean, male versus female leadership can also just be kind of broadened out to just any kind of demographic versus another being more present in a government or at least a branch of it. Like you can have, like, there's the obvious thing of only males can become kings unless there's no male heirs in the whole British thing.
Yeah, they
there could
changed
be
that
forms
recently.
of government which is there could be forms of positions in the government that's more typically given to female members or vice versa, or specific race,
Mm-hmm.
especially if it's a species thing.
Thranduil is pretty definitely patriarchal. In Tolkien's world, in theory, the Numenor, the eldest child born would get the scepter, whether female or male. But in practice, there were only like 4 reigning queens. You'd think there'd be a lot more cases where the eldest would be female, but there was one case where the sisters all refused the scepter and let the chap take it. There was at least one case like that. So it was like 5 cases where there was a female who was the elder one who would have got the throne.
It's a trap. Run away. One based more on logic than the other. Usually kings... female leadership is more representative of, say, emotional intelligence, I would definitely say, just because of the fundamental differences between guys and gals.
I don't know. I don't know if one's more based on logic, than the other. I don't know if
I wouldn't say so.
I don't know if the differences between the sexes are that strong. I don't know.
I would say no, unless we start getting in social factors, which is a completely different thing. And in the setting you're creating, you can make it so those factors don't exist.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the species, you can even make the species have like completely different social factors.
Yeah.
Like completely opposite social factors. Queen Elizabeth II, of course, she didn't actually rule, but yeah.
Like, I wouldn't say females can't be logical and duty-based rulers.
Yep.
And guys again, I don't know how much is biological and how much is just social factors make that more common.
Yeah.
Because if we make a society that has it, you can easily make a society where women are expected to be like that. And then, majority would end up being more so.
Yeah. They had it in Star Trek. They had this thing where the Cardassians assumed that men couldn't do science. There was an episode about it, a whole thing. So, yeah, a lot of that can depend on how you want to. If it's human beings, there are certain limits to what you can do, but you can do pretty much anything if you're getting into various species and stuff. And yeah, a lot of it might be might be social factors. It's hard to tell how much is biological, really.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but that's a whole can of worms. It's a whole rabbit hole in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely true. How somebody is brought up is very important. I would definitely concur with that. Yeah. Yeah. Alrighty, I think that we will conclude it there. This was a good discussion. I'm very glad with how this turned out. There's also another video of a lecture I did on this same topic a little bit ago. This is a little bit more free form. And it has was a little bit more on the round table discussion type deal. All right.
There's a bunch of other randos, essentially.
Pretty much, yeah. Let's go with that.
Okay.
All right.
I'm sure
Well,
there
I
are
think we'll-
brilliant randos, mind you.
You're my randos.
Well, thank you.
You may be randos, but you're my randos, and I love you. Lots and hugs and kisses.
Yeah, please no. Oh God.
Don't worry, it will be on the cheek, bud.
No, thank you.
Remember, he's Mormon. He's not allowed to be gay.
Thank God there's this whole internet thing between us. Maybe our computers will crash now.
He is Borg. He will assimilate the computer.
Oh no. I think I'll just have to smash my computer then. Well, probably should smash it anyway.
I don't think you want to smash your computer. That's only almost as bad as smashing done.
Oh, well, that makes it sound pretty good.
You're not realizing what I mean by smashing, do you?
No.
Think
I wasn't.
innuendo.
I wasn't. Yeah, my innuendo died. My innuendo died on me.
All right, well, we'll call it good for today. Adios, friends.
Have a riot.